You're almost 38 and still childless? Must be hard buying gifts for everyone else's babies, my golden sister said loudly at her baby shower. A few relatives laughed. My mom said, "She's only teasing." I set an ultrasound photo beside the cake and said calmly, "I think I'll be fine. My baby is due this fall." My sister froze with the cake knife in her hand. My name is Nora Kessler, and I've spent 12 years catching other people's miracles as a labor and delivery nurse at Riverside Memorial. I have held babies before their own mothers did. I have logged more due dates, more fetal heart tones, more gestational ages down to the day than most people log birthdays in a lifetime. So when I finally had one of my own to protect, I didn't post it. I didn't announce it. I documented it the way I document everything that matters, and I kept it between me, my husband, and the one doctor I trust more than anyone else in that building. The backyard was strung with pale blue paper lanterns that afternoon because Blair had decided months ago that she was having a boy, gender reveal cannon and all, glitter still ground into the grass from that party in February. Now it was April, 7 months before her December due date, and 30-some relatives were balancing paper plates of lemon cake on their knees in folding chairs, arranged in a loose horseshoe, around a gift table piled 2 feet high. I sat in the second row, next to my husband, Sam, wearing the loosest dress I owned that didn't look like I was hiding anything. Because I was, in fact, hiding everything. I was 26 weeks along that day. 6 months. Quick pause before we continue. I'm Clara, the woman behind this channel. I write these stories because I love that little moment when strangers from different places end up feeling the same thing. If this one already pulled you in, stay with me. It goes deeper from here. Now it was April, 7 months before her December due date, and 30-some relatives were balancing paper plates of lemon cake on their knees in folding chairs, arranged in a loose horseshoe, around a gift table piled 2 feet high. I sat in the second row, next to my husband, Sam, wearing the loosest dress I owned that didn't look like I was hiding anything. Because I was, in fact, hiding everything. I was 26 weeks along that day. 6 months. My due date was October 14th, a fact that existed at that moment only in my chart at Riverside and in a manila folder in my own kitchen drawer. Because I had learned 2 years earlier, in the worst week of my life, that announcing a pregnancy before you trust it is its own kind of dare to the universe. I had lost a baby at 19 weeks. I had stood in that same hospital on the other side of the bed for once, and I had told almost no one outside this family. And even inside it, I had told exactly one person, my mother, who had said at the time, "These things happen for a reason," and then never brought it up again. The way you don't bring up a stain you've decided to stop noticing. So when Blair stood up that afternoon to open the last of her gifts, flushed and glowing in her mint green dress, with her hand resting on the curve of her belly, like she'd rehearsed the pose, and she looked past the diaper cake and found me sitting quietly, with my hands folded in my lap, I understood exactly what was about to happen, because I had watched her do versions of this my whole life. She has a gift for finding the one soft, unguarded place in a room and pressing on it in front of an audience and calling it love. "You're almost 38 and still childless?" she said, loud enough that 3 separate conversations stopped. "Must be hard, buying gifts for everyone else's babies." She laughed first, so everyone else knew it was safe to laugh, and a few of them did. My Aunt Deb included, and my cousin Todd's wife, who barely knew me. My mother, sitting to my right in her folding chair with a paper plate balanced on her knees, patted my arm and said, "She's only teasing, Nora. Don't make a face." Before I had made any face at all, people probably picture rage in a moment like that, something hot and immediate. What I actually felt was quieter and colder than that. It felt like standing at a nurse's station at 3 a.m, watching a family member say something cruel to a patient who is too tired to defend herself, and knowing, in that professional part of my brain that never fully turns off, exactly how to keep my face still while I decide what happens next. I have that skill. It has saved lives. That afternoon, it saved me the indignity of crying in my sister's backyard. I reached into my bag, the canvas one I use for work, The one with a side pocket built for exactly this purpose. And I took out the sonogram photo from 3 days earlier. The one where you could see, unmistakably, a small stubborn profile turned toward the wand like it already had opinions. I stood up. I walked the 8 feet to the cake table, where Blair was still holding the little silver knife they'd bought special for the occasion, and I set the photo down flat on the white tablecloth, right beside the cake. So the date printed along the bottom edge in small gray type was facing up where anyone could read it. "I think I'll be fine," I said, and I meant it to come out calm, and it did, which surprised me more than anyone else in that yard. "My baby is due this fall." Blair's laugh died somewhere in her throat. She looked down at the photo, then up at me, then down again, and her hand, the one holding the cake knife, simply stopped moving, suspended an inch above the frosting, like her whole body had hit pause while her mind tried to catch up to what her eyes were reading. Behind her, my mother's paper plate tipped slightly in her lap. Nobody laughed anymore. My Aunt Deb actually put her hand over her mouth. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I have delivered enough bad news and enough good news in the same week to know that the moment right after a reveal is not the moment to perform anything. I simply picked up my purse, thanked Blair for the lovely shower, told my mother I'd call her Sunday, and walked Sam out to the car, past the gift table, past the diaper cake, past my cousin Todd's wife, who was still holding a fork halfway to her mouth like she'd forgotten what it was for. Sam didn't say anything until we were 2 streets away, buckled into the quiet of the car, spring evening coming down soft and gold over the neighborhood. "You've been sitting on that for how long?" he said. Not quite a question. "Since the 12-week appointment," I said. I wanted to be sure this one was going to stay. He reached over and put his hand on my knee, and I let myself exhale for what felt like the first time in an hour. I thought, in that moment, that the hardest part of the day was already behind me. I did not yet know that Blair would call me at 9:40 that night. Her voice pitched high and strange, asking me how long I'd known and whether I'd done this on purpose, as if a due date were something a person could aim like a dart. I did not yet know that by the following morning, my mother would be standing in my kitchen with a look on her face I hadn't seen since the week of my father's surgery, holding a manila envelope she had kept hidden in her closet for 3 years. An envelope with my grandmother's handwriting on the front and the word "girls" underlined twice. All I knew, driving home that evening with the ultrasound photo tucked back into its side pocket, was that for the first time in longer than I could remember, my sister had looked at me and seen something she couldn't immediately explain away. And in my family, that has always been the beginning of a very long conversation. My phone buzzed twice before we'd even pulled into our own driveway. The first text was from my mother. "We need to talk about the cottage." The second was from Blair. No words at all, just a photo of the 2 of us as kids, maybe 8 and 5, sitting on the porch steps of my grandmother's lake house, arms slung around each other, both of us missing the same front tooth. I sat in the driveway a long moment after Sam cut the engine, looking at that photo, remembering a version of my sister who used to save me the last popsicle, and wondering which one of them I was going to be dealing with by morning. Blair called at 9:40 that night, while I was still in the kitchen washing the 2 dessert plates we'd brought home out of habit, the good ones we always take to family things, because Mom likes them back clean. I let it ring twice before I picked up, mostly because I needed those 2 rings to decide who I wanted to be on this call. "How long have you known?" she said. No hello, her voice pulled tight and thin. "Since February," I said, the 12-week scan. "You sat there for 2 hours today and you didn't say one word. You were opening your gifts, Blair. It wasn't the moment." "It wasn't the moment," she repeated, like the sentence tasted wrong in her mouth. "You had a whole ultrasound photo in your bag. You brought it, you planned that." I stood at my sink with a dish towel in one hand, and I thought about how to answer that honestly, because it was true, in a sense. I had brought it. I had not, however, walked into that yard planning to use it. I had simply stopped being willing after 12 years of watching other families protect each other in delivery rooms at 3 in the morning. To sit still while mine humiliated me in daylight, in front of witnesses, over cake. I brought it because it's mine, I said. The same as you brought yours to every party since October. She hung up. I stood there another minute with the water running. Then I dried my hands and went and found Sam, who was already in bed with his laptop balanced on his knees, and I told him what I suspected was coming. Because after 17 years with this family, I have learned to read the weather before it arrives. It arrived the next morning at 8:15, while I was still in scrubs eating toast standing up at the counter before an early shift. My mother's car pulled into the driveway, and she came up the walk holding something against her chest with both arms, the way you'd carry a casserole dish or a sleeping toddler, except it turned out to be a manila envelope gone soft and rounded at the corners with age. I should have shown you this years ago, she said, standing in my kitchen doorway, still in the cardigan she'd worn to bed, clearly not having slept much either. I didn't think it would ever matter. I don't know what I thought. She set the envelope on my counter next to the toaster, and I saw my grandmother's handwriting on the front in blue fountain pen, the loops of the letters slightly shaky in the way they'd gotten in her last few years. Across the top, underlined twice, girls. This is about the cottage, I said. It wasn't a question. My mother's text the night before had told me that much already, even if it hadn't told me why. It's about the cottage, she said. And it's about some money your grandmother set aside. I've had it in my closet since she passed. I always meant for it to just sort itself out, naturally. Whoever settled down first. Whoever had a baby first, I said, because I had already put enough of this together in the sleepless hour before dawn to know roughly where this was going, even before I'd opened the envelope. That's what this says, isn't it? My mother's face did something complicated. Guilt and defensiveness arguing for the same square inch of her expression. Your grandmother always said the lake house should go to whichever of you started your own family first. She set aside some money to go with it, so whoever it was wouldn't be starting from nothing. She wanted it decided by something real, not by who Mom liked better that year. Those were her words, something real. And you assumed that was Blair. She's been engaged since she was 26, Nora. She's been talking about a nursery since before Trent proposed. What was I supposed to assume? I want to be fair to my mother here because she is not, in most rooms, a cruel woman. She is a woman who has spent 40 years mistaking the loudest certainty in any room for the truth of it. And Blair has never once, in her entire life, presented anything to this family with less than full, unshakable certainty, whether or not the facts underneath it were solid. I opened the envelope, standing at my own kitchen counter in my scrubs, my toast going cold, and read my grandmother's letter for the first time in my adult life. 4 handwritten pages, precise as a legal document despite the shaking hand, saying exactly what my mother had already told me and one thing more. The cottage on Lake Wexford, along with $46,000 held in a savings certificate at Wexford County Bank, was to go, upon her death, to whichever of her 2 granddaughters gave birth first to her first great-grandchild. Not engaged first, not married first, not announced first, born first. I read that word 3 times, born. My grandmother, who spent 60 years keeping a farmhouse ledger down to the penny, had chosen the one criterion in this entire situation that could not be argued, exaggerated, or performed for an audience. A birth certificate has a date on it, so does a chart. Does Blair know what it actually says? I asked my mother. She knows there's money and the cottage. I don't think she's ever read the actual letter. I don't think I've read it since your grandmother's funeral, if I'm honest. I just assumed, the way everyone assumed. I folded the 4 pages back along their original creases and slid them into the envelope, and I felt something shift in my chest that wasn't quite anger yet. It was closer to the feeling I get at work when a chart doesn't match a story a family's telling me, when I have to go quiet and careful and start checking dates against dates, because someone's safety is about to depend on which version turns out to be true. I'm due October 14th, I said. What's Blair's date? My mother hesitated long enough that I already had my answer before she said it. December 2nd. 6 weeks stood in my kitchen with us after that, unspoken. 6 weeks that had existed the whole time in 2 separate medical charts in 2 separate corners of this county. 6 weeks nobody in this family had bothered to ask about because nobody had thought to ask whether I was even in the running. My phone buzzed on the counter. Blair, this time by text, sent to both my mother and me in the same thread. Can't believe you're doing this to me right now. I need everyone at the cottage this weekend so we can talk about the nursery like adults. Under it, a photo she'd clearly sent before, forwarded now for emphasis, of a half-painted room, pale gray walls, a crib already assembled in the corner, a rocking chair with a folded blanket over its arm. She had been moving into that nursery physically for weeks, without asking anyone, the way she has always moved into things, certain that certainty alone was a form of ownership. I looked at that photo a long time before I answered anything. Then I texted back one line, "We'll be there. Bring Grandma's letter, Mom. The whole thing, not just what you remember of it." I finished my toast standing at the counter, threw on my jacket over my scrubs, and drove to work with my mind already doing what it does best under pressure, which is not panic, but organize. 6 weeks between due dates. $46,000 and a lake house sitting on a technicality nobody in this family had bothered to read carefully in 3 years. A sister who had already started painting a room she might not get to keep. And somewhere in a folder at my own OB's office, a prenatal record with every single date on it, certified, time-stamped, and entirely provably true. I clocked in 11 minutes late that morning, which never happens, and my charge nurse, Grace Whitfield, took one look at my face in the break room and said, "Whatever that is, it's not going to fit in a hallway conversation, is it?" I told her not yet, but soon. And she nodded the way she does when she already knows she's going to be asked for a favor eventually, and she's already decided the answer is yes. I need to go back further than that kitchen counter to explain why any of this mattered as much as it did. Because if you only knew Blair from that baby shower, you'd think she was born loud and certain and unkind, and that isn't the whole truth of her. It's the truth of who she became, but not of who she was. We spent every summer of our childhood at that cottage on Lake Wexford, back when it belonged outright to my grandmother, Ruth, and smelled the way old lake houses smell, cedar and citronella, and the particular mustiness of a screened porch that's been damp more years than it's been dry. I was 7 and Blair was 5 the summer I'm thinking of, the summer we both lost the same front tooth within 2 weeks of each other. Hers from a bike accident on the gravel drive, and mine from an overenthusiastic corn on the cob. And my grandmother thought that was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. 2 granddaughters with matching gaps. And she took a photo of us on the porch steps with our arms around each other that used to sit framed on her hallway table for 30 years. Blair used to save me things. That's what I remember most before everything shifted. She'd save me the last popsicle from the box even when she wanted it, break it in half without being asked, hand me the bigger piece and say it was because I was older and needed more. She used to sneak into my room during thunderstorms, not the other way around, and fall asleep with her cold feet pressed against my legs. There is a version of my sister who existed before either of us understood that our mother was going to spend the next 3 decades measuring us against each other. Engagements against promotions, weddings against work anniversaries. And eventually, it turned out, pregnancies against pregnancies. And that version of Blair, the popsicle-sharing, storm-scared 5-year-old, is the reason this whole thing broke my heart before it made me angry. You don't get humiliated like that in a stranger's backyard. You get humiliated like that by someone who used to keep you warm. Somewhere between then and the baby shower, my sister learned that being first felt like being loved. And she has spent every year since chasing the feeling of a room turning to watch her. First to get engaged, first to get married, and first, she assumed, to have a baby. And each time she got there, our mother would say some version of the same thing. Look at Blair. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't she just so ready for her life? And I would stand a half step behind in those photographs. 31, then 34, then 36. unmarried for longer than Blair had ever gone without a boyfriend, and eventually married to a good, quiet man who builds cabinetry for a living and doesn't care one bit about being first at anything. And my mother would look at the two of us like we were proof of two very different report cards. What none of them knew, what I had told exactly one person outside my own house, was that 2 years before that baby shower, in a different April, I had been 19 weeks, along with a pregnancy I had, that time, let myself get excited about. I had told my mother at 12 weeks, because I was foolish enough that time to believe good news should be shared early. I picked out a name. I bought one single item, a soft yellow blanket because I didn't want to overdo it, and I kept it folded in the same drawer where my work scrubs go, so I'd see it every morning getting dressed. I lost that baby on a Tuesday at work, on my own unit, which is its own particular kind of cruelty. Cramping in a supply closet between patients, driving myself to a different hospital 40 minutes away because I couldn't stand the thought of losing my own baby under the same lights where I catch everyone else's. Sam met me there. My mother came the next morning, sat by my bed, patted my hand, and said, "These things happen for a reason." And then, 3 days later, at a family dinner, I had begged Sam to let me skip and gone to anyway because I didn't want to explain my absence. She brought up Blair's upcoming engagement party, as though nothing at all had happened that week, and I understood, watching her do it, that my grief did not have a place at that table that could compete with my sister's next milestone. I never told Blair. I couldn't. By then, the distance between us had already calcified into something I didn't know how to reach across. And I was afraid, if I'm honest, that she would find some way to make even that into a contest. Whose loss was worse, whose body had failed harder, and I did not have it in me to find out. So when I got pregnant again, at 37, 4 months after Blair announced hers, at her gender reveal party, with the blue smoke cannon and the boy t-shirts already ordered, I did not tell a single person outside my own house until I was sure. And even then, I told almost no one. I told Dr. Ann Castellano, who has been my OB for 6 years and delivered 2 of my closest friends' children and knows exactly what 19 weeks felt like for me the first time. I told her at every single appointment, without fail, on the schedule, on the day, because I have watched too many families lose track of gestational age in the chaos of real life. And I was not going to let that happen to the one thing I had left to protect. Every visit went into my chart on time. Every ultrasound was dated. Every single piece of paper I generated in that process, I kept in a plain manila folder in my kitchen drawer, not because I was building a legal case, not yet, but because that is simply what 12 years of nursing had trained my hands to do without asking my permission first. Document everything. Trust the paper more than the room. I thought about all of this the evening after my mother left my kitchen, with the envelope tucked back under her arm, sitting on my own back step with a glass of water because I don't drink coffee anymore, watching Sam turn the compost, and I picked up my phone and called the one person in this family who has never once, in 37 years, tried to make me feel like less than Blair. My Aunt Lucille, my mother's older sister, who moved 2 towns over after her divorce and mostly keeps to herself now, tends a garden the size of a small farm and shows up exactly when you need her and never when you don't. I saw the photos from the shower, she said, before I'd said much of anything. Deb sent them to the family chat like it was good news. I want you to know I didn't laugh. I know you didn't, I said. Aunt Lou, Mom showed me Grandma's letter today about the cottage. There was a pause on the line, the particular kind of pause that tells you someone has been waiting years for a phone call to start exactly this way. Your grandmother gave me a copy of that letter herself, Lucille said, the year before she passed, and made me swear on my mother's grave I'd keep it safe in case anyone in this family ever tried to rewrite what it said. I have it in my cedar chest, Nora, exactly where she put it in my hands. I think it's time you came and saw it yourself, before anybody else gets a chance to decide what it means for you. Aunt Lucille's house sits at the end of a gravel road 2 towns over, past a produce stand and a church with a hand-painted sign. And I drove out there on my day off with Sam, both of us quiet for most of the ride. The way you get quiet before an appointment you've been waiting weeks for. She met us on the porch before we'd even reached the steps. Wearing gardening gloves she didn't bother to take off, and led us straight through the house to the back bedroom, where a cedar chest sat under the window with a quilt folded on top of it that I recognized from every summer of my childhood. Your grandmother didn't trust your mother to hold on to this the way it needed to be held onto, Lucille said, lifting the quilt aside and opening the chest, the hinges giving a small tired creak. Not because she thought less of Carol. She just knew your mother has always had a soft spot for whoever's shouting loudest in the moment, and Ruth wanted this decided by something quieter than shouting. She lifted out a second envelope, twin to the one my mother had shown me. Same blue fountain pen on the front, same word underlined twice. Girls. She handed it to me with both hands, the way you'd hand someone something breakable. Read it here, she said. Out loud if you want. I've read it enough times myself I could probably recite it. I sat on the edge of the cedar chest and opened it, and the 4 pages inside were, word for word, identical to the ones in my mother's envelope, which told me at least that nobody had altered anything in 3 years, whatever else had happened to the story around it. I read the paragraph about the cottage and the $46,000 in the savings certificate at Wexford County Bank. I read the line, again, born, not engaged, not announced, not married, given, upon the birth to whichever of my 2 granddaughters becomes a mother first, so that whoever is starting that hardest and best of all jobs starts it with a roof that is already paid for. She used to say something to me, Lucille said, sitting down in the wicker chair across from me. Toward the end, she said she loved you both exactly the same, but she worried this family had a way of deciding who deserved things based on who performed the loudest, and she wanted, just once, for something in this family to be decided by a fact instead of a feeling. A birth certificate is a fact, Nora. Nobody can argue with a date. I folded the letter back along Lucille's creases, careful with it, and I told her about October 14th and about Dr. Castellano and about the manila folder in my kitchen drawer with every single dated page inside it. She nodded slowly, like she was filing all of it into a place in her mind she'd been keeping empty and ready for exactly this information. Your sister's already moved a crib in there, she said. Did you know that? I saw the photo. She's had Trent's brother repainting that back bedroom for 2 weeks. Your mother helped her pick the color. Lucille's mouth pressed into a thin line. Nobody asked me. I'd have told them the letter said born, not planned. We stayed another hour. Lucille made tea we barely touched, and told stories about my grandmother I'd never heard, about the year Ruth had refinanced the cottage herself, without her husband's signature, because the bank manager in town was afraid to say no to her about the ledger she kept of every dollar spent on that house going back to 1961. By the time Sam and I drove home, the letter itself back in Lucille's cedar chest for safekeeping, a photocopy folded in my bag, I understood something I hadn't fully understood that morning in my own kitchen. This had never really been a fight I needed to win. It was a fact I simply needed to make impossible to keep ignoring. That impossibility got harder to maintain by Thursday. The family group chat, the one my mother has run since group chats existed, lit up that evening with an invitation Blair had clearly drafted herself and asked our mother to send under her name, because Blair has always understood that some announcements land softer coming from Mom. Family, it's time we all came together at the cottage this Saturday to celebrate the nursery and get everything settled the right way. Bring your appetite and your good spirits. Under it, 6 photos. The finished nursery, gray walls, white trim, a mobile of tiny felt stars hung over the crib. A close-up of Blair's hand on her belly in front of the window seat. A shot of the kitchen, freshly stocked, as though she'd already begun stocking a house that had not, in fact, been given to her yet. I typed and deleted 4 different responses before I sent one line into that same thread. Looking forward to it. I'll bring Grandma's letter too, so we can read the whole thing together, out loud, before anyone gets settled into anything. The chat went quiet for 11 minutes, which in that family is an eternity. Then Blair, directly to me, not the group? What is that supposed to mean? Then, before I'd answered, a second message. You're not doing this to me right now, Nora? I am 6 months pregnant. You don't get to make this weird just because you're jealous. I sat with that word a long moment, jealous. I thought about the supply closet 2 years earlier, the drive to a different hospital, so I wouldn't lose my own child under my own unit's lights, the yellow blanket still folded in my scrubs drawer that I have never once been able to make myself throw away. I thought about 12 years of other people's due dates memorized like scripture, and one due date of my own that I had protected so fiercely I hadn't told my own sister until she forced my hand with cake in her fist. I did not send any of that. I have learned in 12 years of family meetings held in hospital hallways at terrible hours that the people trying hardest to provoke you into an emotional response are usually the ones most afraid of what a calm one will reveal. I'm not jealous, I wrote back. I'm due October 14th. I just think everyone deserves to hear what Grandma actually wrote before we start painting rooms based on what we assume she meant. She didn't answer that one at all. My mother called 40 minutes later instead. This is why I love making these stories. People think silence means weakness until the proof is already in the room. Stay with me. We're right at that point. My mother called 40 minutes later instead. Her voice tight in a new way, somewhere between apologetic and cornered. Blair's very upset, she said. She feels like you're attacking her right when she's the most vulnerable she's ever been. I'm not attacking anyone, Mom. I'm bringing a letter you already showed me, so we can read it together as a family, the way Grandma clearly wanted us to, instead of guessing at it in a group chat. She's already told half the family the cottage is basically hers. If this doesn't go the way she thinks, then it doesn't go the way she thinks, I said, gently as I could manage. Because my mother was not, in this particular sentence, being unkind, she was being afraid. And I understand that fear better than most people, having watched it walk into more hospital rooms than I can count. Mom, I'm due 6 weeks before her. That's not a feeling. That's a date on a chart at Riverside, signed by my doctor, same as it would be for anyone else's baby. If Grandma's letter says what it says what it says, whether or not it's convenient for the room. There was a long silence, long enough that I could hear my mother's television playing faintly in the background, some evening game show she watches every night out of habit rather than interest. I always thought it would just work out on its own, she said finally, quieter than I'd heard her sound in years. I never imagined I'd be the one standing in the middle, deciding which of my daughters gets the house your grandmother left. You're not deciding anything, Mom, I said. Grandma already decided. All that's left is for everyone to actually read what she wrote instead of what they hoped it said. She didn't argue with that. She just said she'd see us Saturday, and hung up, and I stood in my kitchen a long time afterward with the photocopy of my grandmother's letter spread open on the counter next to my folder of dated prenatal records. 2 stacks of paper that, put side by side, said something no amount of shouting in a backyard or a group chat was going to be able to talk its way around. I called Dr. Castellano's office first thing Friday morning before my shift, standing in the parking garage at Riverside with my badge already clipped to my scrubs, and asked her scheduling coordinator if there was any way to get in for 10 minutes. Not for care, just for paperwork. Anne worked me in between 2 deliveries, the way people do for each other in that building when they understand exactly what kind of Friday someone is having. You want a letter? She said, once I'd explained it, sitting across from her in an exam room I usually only sit in as a professional courtesy, badge and all, feeling strange on the patient side of that particular desk. A formal one. Dated, certified, on your letterhead, I said. Every visit I've had, every ultrasound, conception window, due date, all of it, spelled out the way you'd write it for a legal record. Not the shorthand you'd write for a chart only the 2 of us are going to read. She didn't ask me why, which I appreciated more than I can easily explain, because I know she could see in my face that this wasn't idle curiosity. She pulled up my chart on her screen right there, scrolled through 8 months of dated entries, and said, "This is one of the most consistent gestational timelines I've documented all year, Nora. You haven't missed a single appointment since your 12-week visit. I could have this letter typed and signed by end of day." "I need it by tomorrow morning," I said. "There's a family thing." She looked at me a beat longer than the sentence required, the particular look of a colleague who has learned to read between other people's careful sentences, and said, "I'll have Marisol printed on the practice's certified letterhead, and I'll sign it myself before I leave tonight. You come by the front desk anytime before 7. It'll be waiting in a sealed envelope with my signature across the flap." I thanked her more times than the moment probably called for, and I went to find Grace Whitfield on my way back to the unit, because Grace has been the charge nurse on labor and delivery longer than I've worked there, and she has a way of getting things expedited through hospital administration that would take anyone else a week of phone calls. I need something notarized fast, and I don't know the fastest way to do that on a Friday. I told her in the break room, and I gave her the short version, the cottage, the letter, the due dates, Blair's photos of a finished nursery she hadn't been given yet. Grace listened with her arms crossed, the way she listens to a family history at a bedside intake, taking in far more than she lets show on her face. When I finished, she said, "There's a notary 2 floors down in medical records. Does half the discharge paperwork for the whole hospital. She owes me a favor from Christmas. Bring your grandmother's letter and Anne's letter both, and I'll walk you down there myself before end of shift. Get everything stamped the same day, so nobody in your family can say later that any of it was put together after the fact." The notary turned out to be a small, brisk woman named Raina, tucked behind a counter in medical records with a stamp and a ledger book older than some of the nurses on my unit. Grace made the introduction. Raina checked my badge against my driver's license without being asked, and I signed my name in her ledger under a column for date and a column for purpose, where I wrote, plainly, family document. She pressed her stamp into the corner of Anne's letter, then into the photocopy of my grandmother's, and slid both back across the counter with the flat, unbothered efficiency of someone who has watched 1,000 families fight over paper, and long ago stopped being surprised by any of it. None of it happened in that break room the way people probably picture it. No plotting, no rehearsed lines to humiliate her back. I filed the request the same way I'd chart a patient at 3 a.m, calm and exact, because a folder built in a hurry after an argument is a folder anyone can pick apart, and a folder built ahead of time, on a slow Friday with a notary 2 floors down, is one nobody can. Saturday morning, 4 hours before the gathering at the cottage, my mother called again, and this time her voice had a different shape to it entirely. Quieter, almost apologetic in a way I hadn't heard from her in years. "I sat with your grandmother's letter again last night, the whole thing, start to finish. Not just the parts I remembered," she said. "I want you to know I understand what it says. I think, if I'm honest with myself, I've understood what it says for 3 years and just never let myself sit still long enough to admit it, because admitting it meant telling Blair no, and I have never once in my life known how to tell that girl no." "I know, Mom. I also want you to know," she went on, "that I suspected, more than once, that some of what she told me about her own timeline was generous. She said she and Trent had been trying for over a year before it happened. I ran into her doctor's receptionist at the pharmacy back in the fall, and the way she talked, it sounded a lot more recent than a year. I never asked Blair about it directly. I didn't want to know badly enough to ask. I didn't say anything unkind about that, because there wasn't anything to gain from it, and because I understood, standing in my kitchen with my folder of certified paperwork already zipped into my bag for the afternoon, that the truth was going to speak for itself in a few hours, regardless of who had suspected what and kept quiet about it. Blair's text came at 11 that morning, the last one before the gathering, and it was the ugliest thing she'd sent me in this entire stretch. Whatever you think you're proving today, you should know I will make sure you never get to be part of this baby's life if you try to take that house from me. Family doesn't do this to family. You've been jealous of me since we were kids, and today you finally get to prove it in front of everyone. I read it twice, standing at my counter, one hand resting flat on the small, steady curve of my own belly, 26 weeks along by then. And I felt something in me go very still and very clear, the way it does in the last minute before a delivery, when all the noise of a long labor suddenly resolves into one single, simple task. I did not answer the text. I put my phone face down on the counter the way I do at the end of a hard shift when I need the rest of the world to wait, and I went and found the folder doctor. Castellano's sealed and notarized letter inside it, my grandmother's photocopied pages beside it, and I set them both into my canvas work bag in the same side pocket where I'd once carried an ultrasound photo into a backyard full of relatives who thought they already knew everything about me worth knowing. Sam found me there a few minutes later, watched me zip the bag closed, and said, "You ready for this?" "I've been ready since October 14th landed on a chart at Riverside instead of a group chat," I said. "Everyone else just needs to catch up." We drove out to Lake Wexford together that afternoon, past the produce stand, past Aunt Lucille's turnoff, the cedar chest and its twin envelope already tucked into her own bag 2 towns over. All 3 of us converging on the same gravel driveway at the same hour, carrying between us everything my grandmother had ever needed anyone to bring to that cottage. A birth certificate not yet written, and every single piece of paper that would prove, beyond any argument a raised voice could win, exactly whose name belonged on it first. The cottage looked exactly the way it always had from the outside. Cedar shingles gone silver with weather. The same screened porch. The same crooked mailbox at the end of the drive that nobody had ever gotten around to straightening. Inside, someone, Blair, almost certainly, had strung the same pale blue paper lanterns from her baby shower across the living room ceiling, and there was a second, smaller cake on the kitchen table. White frosting, a fondant stork on top, as though the outcome of this gathering had already been decided and only needed to be celebrated. About 20 of us crowded into that living room by 2 o'clock, folding chairs dragged in from the porch. My father sitting quietly in the corner, with his coffee the way he sits through most family occasions, present and unwilling to referee. Blair sat in the good armchair near the fireplace, one hand on her belly. Trent standing behind her, with his hands on her shoulders, like a man posing for a photograph he'd been told was important. My mother hovered near the kitchen doorway, the original envelope clutched in both hands. Aunt Lucille arrived 12 minutes after us, her own envelope in a canvas tote, and took a seat near the window without a word to anyone. The way she does when she's decided a room needs a witness more than it needs a participant. "I'm glad everyone came," Blair said, once the room had mostly settled, her voice pitched for an audience the way it always is. "I know things got a little tense this week, and I just want us to put that behind us and celebrate what Grandma wanted for this family. This cottage was always going to be mine. I think we all kind of always knew that." A few relatives murmured agreement, the same easy agreement I'd watched carry Blair through 34 years of getting exactly what she wanted by simply declaring, first and loudest, that she already had it. "I'd like us to actually read Grandma's letter before anyone decides what it says," I said, and I stood up because I have learned, delivering difficult news in far harder rooms than this one, that people listen differently to a person standing than a person still sitting in a folding chair. All of it, out loud. Blair's jaw tightened, but she gestured, magnanimous, toward my mother. "Fine, read it, Mom. Let's just get this part over with." My mother read it haltingly at first, then steadier. 4 handwritten pages in my grandmother's careful, shaking script. The cottage, the $46,000, the bank in Wexford County, and then the line that mattered more than any other line in that room. "Given, upon the birth, to whichever of my two granddaughters becomes a mother first. Born, I said quietly, into the small silence that followed. Not engaged, not married, not the first to paint a nursery. Born. I am due in December, Blair said, too quickly. The practiced ease gone out of her voice for the first time all afternoon. I've been pregnant since March. Everyone here knows that. I'm due October 14th, I said, and I opened my bag and I took out the sealed envelope with Dr. Castellano's signature across the flap, notarized 2 floors down from my own unit less than 24 hours earlier, and I held it up so the whole room could see the seal was unbroken. This is a certified letter from my OB, dated yesterday, listing every prenatal visit I've had since February, notarized this morning at Riverside Memorial. My due date is documented, verified, and 6 weeks ahead of yours. I set it on the coffee table next to the small stork cake, and I watched Blair's eyes go to it the same way they'd gone to the ultrasound photo at her own shower. That same suspended half-second where her whole body seemed to wait for her mind to finish reading something it didn't want to understand. That doesn't prove anything about who conceived when it counts, she said, reaching for anger now, the way she always has when the facts stop cooperating. You could have, I don't know what you could have done, but this isn't fair, Nora. I've been planning this for months. I've painted that room. Trent's brother spent 2 weekends on it. You painted a room in a house that wasn't given to you yet, Aunt Lucille said, from her seat by the window. The first thing she'd said since walking in, and every head in that room turned toward her at once. Because Lucille speaking at a family gathering was, in itself, its own kind of proof that something serious was happening. Your grandmother gave me a copy of this same letter years before she passed, Blair, and made me swear to keep it safe from exactly this kind of assuming. I have watched this family decide who deserves things based on who shouts about it first, for as long as I've been alive, and I promised her, on my mother's grave, that this one thing would be decided by a fact instead. This is insane, Blair said, but her voice had lost its center, gone thin and unsteady in a way I hadn't heard from her since we were children arguing over whose turn it was on the tire swing. Mom, tell them this is insane. My mother looked at the letter still open in her own hands, and then at me, and then, for a long moment, at nothing at all, somewhere on the middle distance of that living room floor, before she spoke. I've read this letter 3 times this week, she said, quiet enough that everyone had to lean in slightly to hear her. I've known for 3 years what it actually says, and I let myself believe it would just work out the easy way, the way that didn't require me to disappoint anyone. That was wrong of me. Nora's due first. Your grandmother's letter is clear about what that means. I'm sorry, Blair. I should have told you the truth about this house a long time ago. Instead of letting you paint a room I had no right to let you believe was yours. Nobody said anything for a moment. Trent's hand slid off Blair's shoulders. My father, in the corner, set his coffee down on the side table with a small, deliberate click, the closest thing to a verdict he was ever going to offer out loud. Blair didn't cry. Not then. Not in front of the room, though I saw her jaw working the way it does when she's fighting the urge to. She stood up, smoothed her dress over her belly, and said, in a voice that was trying very hard to sound like she still had the upper hand, Fine. Take the stupid house. I hope it's worth whatever this is going to do to this family. It doesn't have to do anything to this family, I said, except finally tell the truth about one thing without anyone shouting over it. She left an hour later, Trent trailing behind her, carrying the fondant stork cake he clearly didn't know what else to do with. And most of the relatives filtered out not long after, murmuring the particular kind of murmur people do when they've watched something they'll be discussing at Thanksgiving for years to come. My mother stayed behind with Lucille and me, the 3 of us sitting on that same screened porch where a photograph of 2 little girls with matching gaps in their teeth had hung on a hallway table for 30 years. The paperwork took another 6 weeks to clear the bank in Wexford County, notarized signatures, a title transfer, the kind of unglamorous administrative process that never makes it into the version of a story people tell at parties. But by the 2nd week of October, 4 days before my actual due date, the deed to that cottage had my name on it, and the $46,000 sat in an account Sam and I opened together for exactly the reason my grandmother had intended, so that whichever of us started that hardest and best of jobs first would start it with a roof already paid for. I went into labor on October 13th, one day early, in the same hospital where I'd spent 12 years catching other people's miracles. And Grace Whitfield, off shift that night, but there anyway because she said she wasn't about to miss it, held my hand through the last hour before Dr. Castellano delivered my daughter at 4:52 in the morning. 7 pounds 1 ounce, a full head of dark hair, healthy in every measurement that matters and a few that don't. Blair sent a text 3 weeks later. "Congratulations. She's beautiful. I hope you're happy." I read it twice, the way I'd read her worse ones, and I answered honestly, "I am. I hope you get there too, when it's really yours." We are not close now. Not the way we were as children on that porch, with matching gaps in our teeth. And I have made my peace with that, because some distances, once a family lets them calcify long enough, don't close back up just because a birth certificate finally settled an old argument. But I drive out to Lake Wexford most Sundays now, my daughter asleep in her car seat behind me, and I let myself into the cottage that has my name on the deed. And I make coffee in my grandmother's old percolator on the same stove where she once refinanced a house herself because a bank manager was afraid to tell her no. And I sit on the porch with my coffee and my daughter and the framed photograph I moved from my mother's hallway table to my own. 2 little girls, matching gaps, arms around each other, from a summer before any of it needed proving. I'm Clara, and this is my channel. I love making these stories and sharing them with people across the world. If this one found you at the right time, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.